Let's go ahead and start with a basic example. So let's assign a result variable and we'll assign it equal to the following JavaScript expression. And when we print out this result variable, it's going to equal true. And if you can just kind of logically think through this, not to be confused with logical operators, but if we can just think through this, 20 is greater than 18. This is actually the greater than operator. We're going to talk about all of these in a second. But you can basically figure this out intuitively. This is bigger than this, so the result should be true, right? Well, let's bring in something a little bit more complicated. So let's say something like, I don't know, constant result 2 is going to be equal to 20 equal sign 3 times and then 20. So in this case, it's a little bit harder to understand what we're doing here. We've got an equal sign here and then we have 3 more over here. And this has probably got you thinking like, well, what's going on here? The answer to this expression is going to be true. And that is because 20 does equal 20, but we have to understand what's going on here on the right side of the equal sign before we can really think through this. So to really understand this, we have to get super clear when we're talking about the left side of the equal sign and the right side of the equal sign. We talked about this in the last lesson, but we're going to go into this even deeper now. So if we look at this second expression that we did, this is the assignment operator, and we have to be clear what we're looking at here. So the left side is going to be the variable that we're assigning the right side over here to. So this right side, as I talked about a little bit earlier, is going to evaluate to some value, some single value. And this is what we call a JavaScript expression. And in this case, we're using a special operator, which is the triple equal sign. And this triple equal sign behaves in a certain way that basically says, well, is the left side of it and the right side of it, or maybe this is a little bit confusing, is 20 equal to 20 in both value and type. So we talked about data types before, and this is where that all comes into play. So as we go through these, make sure that you're being clear about what you're looking at. So the left side versus the right side. These equal signs over here are not doing the same thing as this equal sign right here. Think of this as kind of like the master equal sign that kind of determines everything about this whole JavaScript statement, and then any other equal sign that you see are actually going to be operators that are doing some sort of comparison. When we're talking about comparison operators in JavaScript, there are 4 main comparison operators that have to do with equality. So we have the triple equal sign, we have the double equal sign, we have the not equal sign with 2 right there, and then we have the not equals with 1. So you can think of these two, so this one right here and this one right here, these are kind of opposites, while the double equals and the single exclamation and single equals are kind of functionally opposite. Now, what do they actually do? Well, to find out, we need to start playing around with a few values. So once again, just like we could do 20 plus 20 and get 40, we can also evaluate different expressions using these comparison operators. So if we said 20 double equals 20, that's going to evaluate to true. We could also say 20 triple equals 20 is going to evaluate to true. So what's the difference between the two? Well, the difference is it has to do with the data type that we're working with. So if you remember from the last lesson, 20 written like this is going to be very different from the 20 written like this. In the first case, we're looking at a number. In the second case, we're looking at a string. And you can see that the expression evaluates to true, but we're not quite there yet. So let's say we want a number value, and that'll be equal to that 20. And then we also want a string value, which is going to be equal to, I don't know, we'll say 50. But notice how we have these single quotations. We could also have done double quotations here. Doesn't really matter, it's just another way to write it. And so now we have a number value and a string value. And if we use the type of operator, this is actually one that we'll we've already used a little bit, but this is actually an operator itself. And then we put the number value. It's going to evaluate to number. And we can also put in the string value, and that'll be a string. So we know that this number variable and the string variable are of number and string types, but we can try to compare them with each other using the double equals and triple equals equality. So I kind of messed up here. I meant to say that this string value should be equal to 20. So let me just go ahead and redo this once more. So we'll say string value equals 20, and then we'll say number value equals 20, and we're back to where we started here. And now what we can do is we can say string value double equals number value. And this is going to be equal, and it's going to return a value of true, which is a Boolean. And the reason being is because while these are not the same data type, they are the same value. So if we were to convert this string value into a number, so we can use the built-in JavaScript number function and pass in the string value, we're going to get 20, which is a valid JavaScript number. And what's happening here, when we compare the string value to the number value using the double equal sign, what it's doing is it's first converting them to the same data type. So it might convert the string value to a number and then compare it to the number value. So it's comparing apples to apples. And then it checks whether the actual values are going to be equal to each other. In this case, they're both equal to 20. So we have a resultant expression of true. Now, if we tried to do this with triple equals, so string value triple equals number value, we're going to get false, because this time, if we do triple equals, it's not going to convert the types to match each other. So basically what it's saying is, well, yeah, the numbers, the actual values are the same, but the data types are not, so therefore this expression evaluates to false. So when we're looking at these different, the double equals and the triple equals, the double equals does not care about the data type, while the triple equals does care about the data type. And in almost all cases, I would recommend using triple equals because we're just being a lot more explicit about what we're writing in our code that way. While you can see that string value does resolve to true when we compare it with the double equal sign, this is only because it is implicitly coercing the data type of these values. Now, if we did it with the triple equal sign, it's obviously false because they're different values, but like I said, we could do the number string value. So this is explicitly, not implicitly like JavaScript does with the double equals, but we are explicitly coercing this string into a number, and then we can triple equals compare it to this number value, and it's going to equal true. Like I mentioned, these comparison operators are probably the most difficult of all the operators to kind of grasp your head around. Nevertheless, hopefully this makes sense when we're talking about double equals versus triple equals. And then furthermore, if we were to set a result variable equal to the value of string value triple or double equals number value, which we know equals true right here, then what's going to happen, even though we have these equal signs on the right side, remember right side versus left side, we have this expression, this entire expression on the right side of this equal sign. And therefore what JavaScript is doing is it's saying, okay, first let me look at this expression, let me evaluate it and see what it results in. In this case, it results in true. So now I have a true value on the right, and now I want to assign this into the result variable. So we press enter, and we're going to get the value of true in that result variable. Now moving on to the not equals, or this little exclamation point with the double equals, or the exclamation with a single equal sign. These are basically the opposite of what we were doing with the double and triple equal signs. So let's try this once more. We'll say we want a number value of 20, and then we want a string value of also 20, but this is in string form. So these are not going to be equal if we use the triple equal sign, because that cares about the value and the type, but it will be equal if we use the double equal sign. Now, if we just plop in this exclamation point, it's going to reverse everything. So if we do the exclamation point with a single equal sign, and then we say string value, that's basically saying, is the number value not equal to the string value? And in this case, it is equal to the string value because we're using only one equal sign. So the answer is false. I know that's a little bit tough to wrap your head around, but if you think about it long enough, it'll make sense. Now, if we plop in this double equal sign and put in the string value, this is going to evaluate to true, because remember, if we have the in the case of, let's say, hold on one second, triple equals, this is going to care about the value and the type. So it's the same deal with this exclamation point and the double equals. So basically it's saying the number value is not equal to the string value because the types are not equal, and it evaluates to true because no, they're actually not equal to each other. So just try to reverse it in your head. Don't think about this too much. When the time comes, you'll figure out how to use these, but I just wanted to briefly go over them and show you that they're just the exact opposite of double and triple equals. Now, with these equality operators, it gets a little bit tricky when dealing with different data types. So thus far, we've only compared numbers and strings. So if we said 20 triple equals 20, that equals true because it's a number in comparison to a number and they're of the same type. We can also say 20 double equals 20 because, that's kind of saying the same thing. It doesn't care about the types are the same, doesn't care, but the values are the same, so it equals true. We can also compare strings. So we can say hello world, and that is going to be triple equals to hello world, and that's going to equal true. And we're also able to remove one of those equal signs, and it's going to give us the same answer because the values are the same, the types are the same, it doesn't really matter there. So we can use it with numbers and strings. We can also do booleans. So if we said true triple equals true, that's going to give us true. Now I know that's a little bit of a tongue twister there, but we're saying that the value of true, which is a boolean, is equal to another value of true. So that expression evaluates to a truthy value and it prints true. So I've said true about 50 times in the last 30 seconds, so let me stop doing that. But basically, we can do strings, numbers, and booleans with our equality operators. Now, if we try to do arrays and objects, the game changes a little bit. So let's say that we have an object which is equal to, we'll say property 1, some value, and then we'll go down. Actually, I needed to hold shift down while I did that, so let me redo this real quick. So starting over, we have my object, and this will be equal to property 1, which is equal to some string value, and then we have, we'll say property 2 is going to be equal to a number, and there's our object. We also will define my array, and this will be equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just a bunch of numbers in there. And all we have to say to prove this out is my array equal to my array? And the value here is going to be equal to true because you're comparing the same variable with itself. But let's say that we created another array, and this time it's going to equal the same exact thing. So I'm going to put in the same exact numbers, it's going to look exactly the same. We'll press enter, and now if we compare my array triple equals another array, it's going to equal false. So in the first case, when we were comparing the same variable with itself, it equals true, which makes sense. But why does this not equal each other? Why does my array not equal another array? They look exactly the same. And this is one of the quirky parts of JavaScript. You'll hear that a lot, but I'm not going to get into why these are not equal and actually how to compare two different arrays using JavaScript. It's just too complex for what we're talking about. But just know you cannot compare everything. And the same goes for objects. So if we said my object triple equals my object, it's going to equal true because we're comparing the same exact object. But if we say another object and we make that equal to the same exact one, so property 1 is going to be equal to some value, and then property 2 is going to be equal to 20. So this is the same exact object that we had up top, but this time if we say my object triple equals another object, we're going to get false. And you might be wondering, well, maybe this is just because we're using triple equals. Well, that's not the case. Even if we used my array double equals another array, it's still going to be false. And if we use my object double equals another object, it will also be false. So you cannot compare with these comparison operators arrays and objects. You actually have to use a different library in a lot of cases, and a lot of developers turn to a library called Lodash. So if we just type in Lodash into the browser, you'll see that this is a utility library that basically provides you with a bunch of different methods that you can use to do a bunch of common JavaScript operations that would otherwise take you writing a good amount of code to do. But again, this is way too complex for what we're doing right now, so we're going to go back and keep going with our discussion on operators. So we've gotten through the bulk of these comparison operators. The hardest ones are done. Now we just have to talk about numeric comparison operators. And these will not come as a surprise. We have the greater than, less than, greater or equal to, and less than or equal to operators. And you can see how these work. 40 is greater than 20, that's true. 20 is less than 40, that's also true. 20 is less than or equal to 20, that is true. And 20 is greater than or equal to 20. So you can see how these all work. They're pretty common, and if you took any sort of math class, you'll know exactly how these work. Now, the final operator that falls into this comparison operator category is something called the ternary operator. And that is spelled, let's see if I can spell this, ternary is what I'm saying here. And this ternary operator is going to look like this. So we'll say we want to assign a result variable, and we want to assign this equal to the following expression. So we'll say 20 triple equals 20. We'll add a little question mark, and then we'll say values match. And then we'll add a colon, and we'll say values do not match. And we'll press enter, and you're going to see that the result is values match. So this is a very confusing expression to look at first glance, but you will get used to this. This is something that a lot of programmers really like. Some of them do not like it because they think it makes it more complicated. We haven't talked about conditionals yet, but I think you'll be able to understand this a little bit, so I'm going to try to explain it real quick. This expression right up here is going to be functionally equivalent to the following expression. So we'll say if 20 triple equals 20, then we'll say return, or actually no, we need to redo this real quick. We need to first say or declare a variable, so we'll say result variable, and we don't need to assign a value to it yet. We'll say if 20 triple equals 20, then we want to assign the result variable equal to values match. And if it does not equal, so else, then our result variable is going to be equal to values do not match. If I can spell right. Okay, so when we press enter, it's going to say that it evaluated to values match, just like it showed up here when we printed the result. And if we type out result variable, you can see that it has been assigned that value. So I wanted to show you this, even though we haven't gone through the if-else statements yet, the conditionals, but I think it's fairly intuitive to understand. We're saying if this expression evaluates to true, then I want to assign the variable to what is after this question mark, or the values match. Otherwise, this else statement, which is going to be substituted by the colon, we want to assign it to values do not match. So in other words, this question mark is kind of like the if part, and this colon is kind of like the else part. And this everything left of the question mark is going to be the expression that we're actually evaluating. And remember, this is where it gets, this is where it's kind of confusing when you're first starting out. Remember, we have to keep the right side and the left side separate in our head. So we're looking at this equal sign. What is to the left side of the equal sign? Well, that is the result variable. Now, what is to the right side of the equal sign? Well, that's everything here. So this entire expression is to the right side. And when JavaScript looks at this, the first thing it does is it says, what's on the right side? And furthermore, how do I evaluate that? And then it uses the rules of this ternary operator to say, okay, first I want to look at 20 triple equals 20. What does that resolve to? Well, that resolves to true for reasons we discussed before, and therefore I'm going to grab this value right here. Now, if it would have resolved to false, then it would say, okay, I don't want this, I actually want this one over here. And then once it's found that answer, it's done all of this work on the right side, it's come to a single answer, which is the values match. Now it's going to assign that to the result variable. So you have to be very clear with yourself whether we're talking about the right side, which could be a really long expression, or the left side, which is the target variable that we're assigning the end result of the right side to. We are finally done with the comparison operators. I know this took up most of the video, but they are very important, and you'll see why once you start writing a good amount of code. You're going to use them a ton.